Welcome in to another edition of Scoop Live. Will not be called Scoop Live this time next week. We will have a name. We will discuss that shortly. I'm Tommy Ashley. That's the star of the show, Don Callahan. We are sponsored by Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. And I must say, I'm out of sorts a little bit. Clearly not in my way up, aka Man Tower, down at the beach, in-laws, beach place. Got everything set up. And I forgot to send you the link, Don.
You did. I was sitting waiting for it. I was like, what is going on?
I was like, "Why are you not in here?" Come on, man. And, just for our folks, why were you not in here? What have you been working on? It seems like you've been quite busy lately, my man.
Yeah, I had well, specifically, I was doing an interview with a recruit. But I was ready at noon, and I'm just sitting here waiting for the for you to send me the link. So
Hey, stuff happens. I was, like, literally off it. Alan Minton in chat, shout out to being the first afternoon dish, that's the tweet. That might be a possibility.
should we
Um,
throw out there that we're going to have a chat MVP?
so we're gonna do the naming rights, and I've got my choice. Don and I will discuss it, and I said that person that submitted that name will get a hat, Inside Carolina hat, Richardson hat, special hat. Can't buy them in stores yet. And then we're gonna have a chat MVP. Are we gonna do that every week? Is that what you want to do?
Yeah. So we won't. So whoever's the MVP for this week, we'll announce it next week. So it's
Gotcha.
just whoever's the most active. We're gonna want to spread the love around. So there's certain people who are going to be more active, like every single week. We want to give it to other people too. So maybe at some point after we get all the super active people out there, maybe some newcomers, that sort of thing. But yeah, just keep it light and fresh. Maybe if you have a really good comment or a really good question, maybe that will be it. So we'll decide on who the MVP is, and then next week we'll announce it.
Yep.
Give you a shout out, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and there's a ton of folks that are on here, like every show ever. And I was watching Joey and Sherelle. I was in the background a little bit watching their show, and it's the same folks that are always in here. So they should 100% get in the chats, get active, because we're going to start naming MVPs. And everybody loves an MVP, right? Doesn't
That's
It
right.
doesn't matter how you play. It's that MVP trophy that matters. So join up and get in the chat. And special shout out to the folks that get in here on Wednesdays at noon. Don and I decided when we were doing this show that we wanted to do something different. We do most of our lives at 9 o'clock at night. So Wednesdays at noon is a tough time for everybody to get here, but especially shout out for everybody that's here live. And of course, if you're not listening to this live, you're just as important. Give us a shout out, rate us, review us, like, subscribe, all that stuff wherever you get your podcasts and on the YouTube channel. Don, let's get right into it. North Carolina's defensive back room. If folks are watching and they're
Oh wait, hold on. Can we're gonna do our top five at the end of the show.
oh yeah,
Top
top five
five
movies.
football movies, I thought.
Yep, football
Football
movies.
movies. So put those in the chat. We will read everybody's from the chat at the end, and we'll give ours. We'll discuss, but that's towards the end. So do that throughout the show. We might need to throw out some additional reminders later, but I'll let you get back into what we're at. What the main purpose for why we're here.
Why we are here. If you're a premium Tar Pit subscriber, if you're not, I don't understand why not. Plus the Johnny T-shirt discount. But if you're a premium subscriber, you know that Don dropped a
Hey,
defensive
so
back scoop.
I know I keep on interrupting you, but my man
Man,
Preston, he had, and we need to find it. So Preston, please send the same top five you sent last week. Did you see it? He posted it
I
in.
saw it.
Oh, did you see it?
Well, I can't remember it. Just if I'm honest.
There was his number one was awesome. But anyway, go ahead. No
Okay.
more
Well,
interrupting you.
yeah. I'm going to interrupt you a plenty, and I'm trying to give you your flowers, and
Ugh.
I'm drinking out of my turtle cup. You can tell I got the beach theme going on. Got some pictures back there, but anyway, defensive back scoop. Don dropped that, I guess, yesterday on Tar Pit Premium. And Don, overall, before we get into it, what is the theme of this 2024 defensive back recruiting cycle? Do you think for North Carolina? A lot of interesting names,
Yeah, I
far and
think
near. What do you think?
the theme.
Yeah,
I
like
think
what are they really going for?
I
Is it
think they're trying to definitely fill the depth. I mean, I know that they've picked up some guys from the portal in the prior portal window, but some of those guys, most of those guys, only have a year or two of eligibility. They lost a lot of guys in the portal, particularly from the defensive back group. So I think they need to kind of replenish this position room. And so I mentioned this in the scoop, but depending on the size of this class, I think it's going to be a good size class. I would guess a quarter of the class, if not more, will be defensive backs just because of the need that's there.
if you look at the depth charts, go to Inside Carolina's football recruiting board on that same Tar Pit message board and go to DBs and scroll down and look at the scholarship roster 2023. I mean, it is unbelievable how many grads or seniors are on there.
Yeah.
I mean, it is by far, and I'm sure I'm wrong, but it appears to be by far the most experienced group. I didn't say best group, but most experienced group. You got Derek Allen, Biggers, and Don Chapman, who came back, all in the boundary safety category, that are all grads. So they've played 4 years plus 5 years of football. You got DJ Jones currently on there. He's just another senior. You got Armani Chapman from Virginia Tech, another grad. Legend Cavazos, another senior slash junior. I mean, the eligibility to COVID year and all that kind of mess. And then you've got Antavis Lane coming over from Georgia State. You got Elijah Huzzy from East Tennessee State. These guys are old football players for college. And so just a ton of experience. Don, to your point, portal changes everything. But all things equal, those guys are not going to be the big majority of those guys are not going to be on the roster next year, which
Yeah.
makes this class that even bigger, even though the portal can alleviate some of those.
Yeah. No, I you need depth. And I think this is the danger of depending too much on the portal. And this is out of the coaching staff's control. So I'm not trying to blame them at all, but they lost so much out of the portal during that first window. And then they were able to kind of answer or fill some of those holes with portal guys. But you get into this cycle of constantly going into the portal, and the portal, as we're starting to learn, is a little bit unpredictable on what you're going to be able to pull out of it. So you still have to have the base of your whatever position it is still needs to be built through the high school ranks, and that's what I think in this class they're trying to do. But I'm curious, to kind of bring you into. I know you don't want to make it about you, but you saw a lot more. Well, definitely way more spring ball than I did. Had a lot more conversations with the coaching staff than I did. So, what do you think the starting secondary is going to look like this fall?
Ooh, I think, I'll start with Huzzy. I mean, everybody listening to this knows that um, Jason Staples loves the guy, and strongly disappointed we didn't get to see him in action in the spring game. He was dressed in jersey and shorts, and so he didn't play. But I believe the staff loves him,
Mm-hmm.
and just Jason raves over him. He's an experienced guy. He's stepping up a level, yes, but the skills that he has travels, and he was able to make a heavy mark in the spring. I think Derek Allen out of Georgia Tech surprised some people. To be honest, when they picked him up, I didn't really remember him much from Georgia Tech and making a ton of plays. He's a good player, but I think he's out there. I think they really like Will Hardy. Hardy was obviously in a red jersey and a no contact jersey a fair amount, or all spring really. but I think they really like him, and I think Hardy played really well um, on a defense that struggled heavily last season and made some plays. He got thrown in the fire. I mean, he got thrown in the fire at App State, and it was a raging, uh, just a wildfire out there. And, you know, he struggled as well, but he acquitted himself. So you've got those guys that I think are probably solid starting. I could be wrong. You know, one of those other safeties could slide to that field safety area maybe, or maybe Antavis Lane comes in, but they see him more of a star out of Georgia State. And he's a little fella. When I say little, he's short. He's 5'9". And so you slide him up into the star role. But that other cornerback is going to be interesting. You know, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Chapman out of Virginia Tech, who was hurt all spring? Is it going to be Cavazos? Is somebody like Tayon Holloway going to step up? Or is it going to be Marcus Allen? And you get Allen and Allen in the starting defensive backfield. I think that'd be pretty cool. You had brothers back there. Certainly you'd have some good chemistry going forward. But I think out of that group, Don, I think that's where you're looking at the starters. How they use them is going to be something interesting to watch. I don't think.
All right, so I'm assuming Boykin at star.
Boykins is there. I mean, they put Lane at star, you know, on this depth chart too, especially. You know, can Huzzy go there? You know, it's they're going to mix and match. You know, everybody always talks about you got to play the best guys, all right? Well, if your best guy at boundary safety, or excuse me, boundary corner is maybe your best guy at another position, but the other boundary corner, you know what I mean? The pieces have to align for that. So I think what they want to be able to do is play more guys and have more production, and then have opportunities that if a guy's not producing, to put somebody else out there. I think Huzzy's going to be number one if he stays healthy, without question. I don't think you know, it's interesting with Don Chapman. He left, he came back. Did it have anything to do with Conley leaving? You know, it's just interesting there. But I think Huzzy's absolute, and I think Derek Allen and Will Hardy are close to that. And it'll be that fourth guy or fifth guy, you know, because they're going to play the star, like you said. So I don't think there's room, and I could be wrong, and I'd be interested in hearing you discuss this, flipping it back to you, on guys that have come in and the new guys that are not far removed from high school. Is there room for a younger guy to get some playing time in that defensive backfield?
Well, I think it's so in flux. There's the opportunity, but it's going to be tough because I agree with you. I think that there's, you know, at corner, I'm a big Huzzy fan. Marcus Allen played a lot, looked really good. Legend Cavazos looked really good last year too. Those are probably the guys, I guess, at corner that those three. Chapman, I didn't hear a lot of positive things, and some of this might be sour grapes, but I didn't hear a whole lot of positive things from people I know at Virginia Tech who are usually pretty honest about it. So I don't expect him to be too much of an impact based off of that. You mentioned safety. Yeah, I mean, I think Will Hardy will play a bunch because he played a bunch last year as a true freshman. And then I think it's kind of mix and match with, you know, does Derek Allen, Biggers, Chapman, you know. So it's just so hard for the incoming guys or even the guys who have just been on campus for just a year, other than, you know, a guy like Will Hardy who played a bunch last year. But I guess if I had to throw out a name, I probably would go with Tayon Holloway, who didn't play at all last season, which really surprised me. I think there was some injury stuff going on. I don't know that to be fact, but it's just kind of what I feel like I remember someone telling me. But I'm pretty sure he didn't see any action. And I remember seeing him in person and then also watching his film. I thought he was an absolute stud and a steal for North Carolina. And I thought he was one of the guys that, because of COVID, which prevented him from participating in, you know, the showcase camps and a lot of schools seeing him, because he was part of that I guess he was the 2022 class.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he committed so early. He committed before the COVID, I guess, shutdown for visits ended. So he
Right.
didn't take a whole lot of visits. He wasn't big in recruiting, but I loved his film. I loved his approach to playing the cornerback position. I love the fact that his senior season he blew up as a wide receiver because it kind of speaks to his playmaking ability and his ball skills. And so I think if I had to throw someone out there who hasn't played a whole lot, I would expect him to be the guy.
Yeah, and he made some plays in some of the practices that we were allowed to see. He made plays out there. You know, I do like when you discuss a cornerback or a defensive back having wide receiver skills because
Mm-hmm.
we always hear, you know, they play DB and not wide receiver because they don't have the hands, and that's why they're on defense and not on offense. So if you've got a guy that can catch the football and make
Okay.
plays on the ball, that's even better. So maybe he's a young guy, but yeah, they've got options.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and as you were talking, and as we're talking about these younger guys, it's dominated by older guys. The younger guys, this is where the developmental process comes in, and you know, we can talk about star rankings and all that stuff, but ultimately guys have to be developed. So that'll be interesting to watch. But Don, and it's a gigantic but with one T, do they stick around? Do players in this day and age stick around to be developed? Or is it a situation where we've talked about the portal and having to dip in, or do you have to dip in the portal every year? So that'll be something I will watch a lot because, like I said, leading off the top of this segment, there are going to be a ton of guys that are out of eligibility.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not they play a lot or stick around, they're not going to be eligible to play college football again. And so North Carolina is going to have to develop what they have, but also I think in lieu of guys playing early out of the 2023 class, they're going to have to seek in the portal or dip in the portal again. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that's that's what they don't want to do, but that's what they will do, obviously, if that's what they need to do. Because I think that we're looking at this depth chart here, and you mentioned this before. Oh, now I lost it. Oh, no, I got it. All right. Just the amount of guys who are leaving the program after the season is a crazy amount. And one of the things that Mac Brown has definitely done is fill starting needs through the portal, and I think it's a smart way to go, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So what do you make of all of the disproportionate, transfer out from the DB group? Because I think if you just took those guys and just look at the other part of the roster, it hasn't been a whole lot, but DB just seems to be constantly getting hit. And in some instances, as guys leaving and then coming back, and then with Hollins, he left, came back, and left again. Chapman left, came back, and Connolly kind of surprised me
yeah,
just because, I mean, I don't go to as many practices as you have, but I can remember going to games and the few practices I've gone to, always seeing him on the sidelines by himself or with a trainer working through, his different physical therapy stuff to come back from injury and to spend all that time. And I don't know, it was kind of a mystery to me. Obviously not my area.
yeah. I mean, yes, Conley was surprising, but there's multi facets to those decisions, especially his. You've got the guys that leave that want to play. Period. You've got guys that may not fit a new scheme or may not fit what the coaching staff is trying to do. They're good enough to play, but they're not going to provide what those coaches want. And and then you have guys that just aren't good enough, and maybe it goes on everywhere. But look, you're not going to play here. You might as well leave. We'll try to help you. And we've heard
Mhm.
Mac say that a lot. So there's a variety of reasons. Then you've got life and you've got school and everything. So I think all of those play a role in these decisions to leave. Um, as far as when you separate covering a team versus pulling for a kid themselves. You go through a lot. We've heard about depression. Mac talks about depression and suicide a lot with college age kids and all that, and how it's important, the mental health aspect of it. So whatever happens, you want that stuff to be taken care of. And you know you wish a guy like Conley well in all facets of life. His father was on this podcast on with me. It's interesting, and folks that are watching maybe remember it. We had Mr. Conley, we had Mr. Rucker, and we had Mr. Uh, Glover, Tony Grimes' dad. It was a heck of a podcast,
I bet.
and Reverend Rucker was amazing.
Uh-huh.
Still is, and I know he pays attention to these. But it's just interesting to see, of all those guys that were together then, and that was a year ago, how it's changed so
Yeah.
fast. And that's just the nature of it. College football, college athletics, ultimately, I think people want to play because it is a finite time. Like you and me, we can sit on the couch and watch TV all forever. But those players, they got however many years in their bodies to play
Yeah.
the sport. So as far as looking at the roster now, Mac talked about it early on that they don't want to dip into the portal for depth. They're going
Hmm.
for starters, and I think that's probably evolved a little bit. And I was going to ask you this to sort of spin it back to this cycle: is everybody left out of that room, and that was interesting. I think it was a function of last year was a disaster. Of course, there was a coaching change. Dre Bly is no longer on that staff.
Well, that was part
And
of that was in response to the disaster, right?
yeah, absolutely. And then you have Charlton Warren's got a style that may not mesh with the guys that were there, how they like to be coached or how they're coachable. Everybody has, that's the great thing when you talk to enough head coaches and enough position coaches. These guys have styles and they recruit to those styles.
Hmm.
And if you didn't get recruited to that style, and then the guy you got recruited to left, and now you're at school with a guy whose style you might not get along with, that's another reason to leave. So
Yeah.
I think all of those things I mentioned there, all of it, sort of wrap into why the defensive back room was such in flux over the past, however, what are we, May 3rd now, over the last 6 months. It's just been chaotic, and it did not help. And if folks listening to this haven't read Buck Sanders's uh, column today, there was a lot of bad football being played for whatever reason. The numbers, the stats don't lie.
Yeah.
And so here we are with transfers and a lot of experience in a defensive back room that has to be better. Doesn't need to be better. It has to be better for North Carolina. When you talk to, let me ask you this, and shout out to the folks that are in here. The crowd is building every day. Shout out for spending your lunchtime on Wednesday with Don and I.
Do you have to go to YouTube itself to see how many people are in there?
I
I
can
can
see
see
it
that.
on my screen. There's 50 plus in here.
Okay.
It should be on the top of your screen. It's top of mine at least. I don't know if it's because I'm an
Yeah.
admin or whatever.
You got better perks than I do.
I got more skills, but
Hmm.
just you made me lose my train of thought. Anyway, I'm gonna talk about Johnny T-shirt. We're gonna come back because I will remember it when I'm talking about Johnny T-shirt. They support this podcast. They support Inside Carolina. They support you for the Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Go visit them on Franklin Street. I was up there yesterday moving furniture out of a dorm room already, and I also went to the baseball game. And I did not get my Johnny T-shirt, and I regret it because that's the go-to place when you're in Chapel Hill. So check them out online or in store. Alumni owned and operated, and they have every single piece of equipment, piece of gear, piece of clothing that you could use and need if you're a Carolina fan, as all of you are. Haven't seen any opponent trolls in the chat yet. I'm sure it's coming, but they can even go to Johnny T-shirt and get whatever they need for their secret love, which is Carolina football and Carolina basketball and Carolina athletics. National guys pay the bills. Be right back with Scoop Live. All right, Don. I can't remember my train of thought, but the point being is that this room is completely changed
Mm-hmm.
from last year. So when you talk to potential recruits in the 24 class and beyond, how much of what has gone on and what was on the field last year and the year before matters in the recruitment of these young men?
So I don't think so. I think where it matters is what we were talking about, the term that we kind of use, that prestige term. So I think it has affected people's feelings on, those recruits' feelings on North Carolina and where they're kind of at in the football hierarchy. I think from a standpoint of, I just don't think recruits pay close attention enough to, development and that sort of thing. And then also, even if you wanted to, it's so hard to quantify, because if you think about it, you take just let's take, I'm not going to name a specific name, but you take a DB that's signed with Mac in the 2019 class. He's had a couple of different, he had Dre Bly for most of his, well, I guess all of his career, but also had a couple of different defensive coordinators, which matters a lot to the secondary. And then also, then you get, Charlton Warren, who comes in. How do you quantify just where it went right, where it went wrong, who did what, and that sort of thing? So it's hard to really say. You know what I mean? And then you also got to somehow calculate in there just how good of a player they were when they arrived and all that sort of. I just don't know if you can. I mean, obviously we can look at it and see it's going well, it's not going well. But I think for a recruit, especially because they're high school kids, and you have high school boys, so you know how it is. I mean, their attention span is like a squirrel's. It just is not there to pay that close attention. So I think for them, it's more about the relationship they're able to build with Charlton Warren or Coach Jones or Mac Brown, and that sort of thing matters a lot more. And then yes, just their thoughts on the program in general and really what has happened with that program within their lifetime.
Yes, interesting. So you've covered this stuff for 20 plus years, and you've covered Charlton Warren twice now.
Yeah.
When you watch the players they go after, and of course Jason Jones is in the mix as well here, as is Gene Chizik being the defensive coordinator. Where has if there has been, how has there been a shift in type of player that is recruited by this version of North Carolina defense, Warren, Jason Jones, versus maybe Bateman and Bly? Is it the same guys
Yeah.
that
So
would
I
be
think it's
recruited, or
more
is there
of,
a different take?
yeah. So I think it's more of like a full defensive scheme philosophy change. Bateman loved the tweener guys that didn't fit in a specific position, because Bateman, before he arrived at North Carolina, his scheme received that positionless defense was its kind of nickname, because of the fact that he loved to kind of throw off the offense by doing things that the offense didn't expect, which means, blitzing a safety, dropping a defensive tackle into coverage, which I know when those things don't work or you get blown up for, they look like, what are you doing? But when they do kind of confuse the defense or the offense, then we're like, oh wow, he's a genius, which there were times where people referred to him as such. But anyway, so his focus, I don't want to say his focus, he loved those sort of guys. That's why I think guys like Ra Dilworth transferred out. Gabe Stevens transferred out. Those sort of guys, Bateman was able to, and maybe even Connolly, to be honest with you, because Connolly, has certain skill set that works great. Obviously, had a great start to his career for UNC under Bateman. So he loves those guys, whereas Chizik and Warren, they're more of a, they have a specific mold for each position, and that's what they're looking for, and they try not to deviate from that too much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, um, I mean, it's kind of like DNA, right? It's like 99.9% all the same, but
Hmm.
there's a small part that makes
Yeah,
us all different. It's the same with coaches. They have tweaks in what they like, and Chiswick and Warren and even Jason Jones, I guess it's more of a traditional. Well, this guy's a corner. This is not a tweener. He's a corner, or he can be a star, or he can be a safety. Versus what you talked about with Bateman, and we use the term probably way too much. The Swiss Army knife type player,
yeah,
and and then the issue with those type players, and there's been a ton of them that are really good. The issue with those type players, though, is when you change your philosophy, is how do you fit them in? And to your point,
yeah,
that's why guys may get the talk that you just we don't have a space for you,
yeah.
or you're not the type of player we want. That's not necessarily a shot at the
No.
how good a player is by any means. That's a shot at this is what we want,
Hmm.
and so guys move on. So looking at this board now, and I don't want to give away too much of your scoop. Folks need to go check it out. It's amazing work what you do with this. Um, obviously they're going to need players. They're going to
Hmm.
need good players. Who do you think's maybe highest up, or in your opinion, highest up on North Carolina's board here, given the fact that there will be plenty of spots available after next season?
So I know from what I shouldn't say no. From what I've gathered, a guy like Malcolm Ziegler, who's basically kind of a neighbor of mine.
That's your
Um,
fellow, right? You can just walk through the woods and go check them
yeah,
out,
yeah,
right?
he's just. I have to go to Fuquay for just about everything, but my kids know him, know of him, that sort of thing. But you, if you follow him on Twitter, he is killing it in track with some mind-blowing track numbers, and he's a legit 6'2", 200-pound kid. So he has a size, he has a speed, that sort of thing. It looks like UNC and South Carolina are only two schools that he has official visits to. It looks like it might come down to those two programs. I know he really values education, which I think you would have to give the nod to North Carolina. But South Carolina, if we're being honest, is kind of the hot program, regardless of what they've done on the football field. I don't even know what the record is, what
Right.
the record was last season. But they're doing really well. Their recruiting class is doing tremendous, and they're the hot program, and so that's kind of the pull there for them. A couple other guys, Tyshawn White, a 4-star kid from Buford, which is a national powerhouse. UNC's been able to draw him to campus, I think, like 3 times already, which is pretty impressive considering he hasn't made a whole lot of visits, particularly this offseason because of his 7-on-7 and track seasons. There's some guys who are diamonds in the rough, things such as Cameron Courtney. Jalen Thompson is a kid I know the staff really, really likes. It doesn't match up exactly with the rankings. I'm not saying the staff is wrong or that the rankings are wrong. I'm just saying that they definitely like those two guys. I mean, Courtney, I don't even think is ranked. Yeah, he's not even ranked yet. But the staff really likes those guys. Feel like they're diamonds in the rough. There's also a guy to kind of throw out a big name, a 4-star guy, Zion Ferguson, who has been committed to LSU since I think September.
Mm.
He actually, the only school he's visited since then is North Carolina for the UNC Duke basketball game, and he has an official visit scheduled to Chapel Hill. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes through with that visit, and if it does anything. If you follow him on Twitter, he's just pumping up LSU the entire time. So it's hard to envision him, going in a different direction. But you never know once you have a kid on campus. There's a bunch of other guys here too that North Carolina is a really good shot with, that they're recruiting, that official setup, and all that's kind of laid out in the scoop. Was there any particular guys you wanted to talk about?
Well, I was going to ask you about Ferguson because, like you mentioned, he is actively LSU
Yeah,
and he's visiting Carolina. I mean,
yeah.
how's that work?
I guess because LSU isn't worried. I think the UNC Duke basketball game visit can easily be explained. You tell
Yeah.
them, because his mom's from Durham, graduated from Hillside High School, grandmother still lives in Durham. You can easily say, hey, this is a big game for my family, free tickets, yada yada. He brought a lot of family members, went to that. The official visit, I think, is going to be a little bit harder to explain. But, is Brian Kelly going to worry about North Carolina for a
Yeah.
kid that's smack dab in the middle of SEC country? I don't
Hey,
I don't think so. So I think you allow him to take it, not worry too much. I think you would worry a little bit more if he was, visiting Alabama or somewhere like that. But I think that, you allow him to kind of to take that experience with his family, get that out of his system, sort of thing.
I got a bunch of questions that are just
Okay.
popping here. How much does family matter? How much for players? And I'm not saying go, and we can do a whole separate show on North Carolina specifically, like
Hmm.
players from North Carolina and in the footprint. But how much does having family nearby a school, and since this is inside Carolina, we'll talk about it because it seems like there are, and we can also discuss that on a different format. There's a ton of players that have family here in this state. How much does that matter? How much does North Carolina or is North Carolina able to use that to their favor in pulling guys that may not be into the traditional footprint or they're just outside of the state or whatever, but grandma's in Durham? How much does that matter, and how much does North
Yeah. So
Carolina
I think
use that?
that, well, first, most recruits will tell you distance doesn't matter, but for most recruits, to some degree, it does. We talked about Don Chapman. That's an exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen. And so most recruits end up staying, I would say, let's say a reasonable driving distance from their immediate family, not necessarily their grandmom. Now, does it help North Carolina? Absolutely, it doesn't hurt. Especially because I mean, where he's outside of Atlanta, that's really not that far. It's a solid drive, and then to not only have that, but to know that family are around in case something does happen, that's always a positive. But clearly, he's committed to LSU, so clearly it wasn't that big of a pull, and just his feelings about LSU overcame that. But I mean, it helps, but I don't think it helps as much as you may think.
Right. Well, to your point, it certainly doesn't hurt, and and we've seen people, we've seen grown-ups come home to be closer to family, and older relatives. I mean, Clyde Christensen did
Well,
that, and
I
they lost a parent there recently. But it's an interesting dynamic to me, um, because when I see Ferguson, I'm like, why would he visit? That's why he's visiting. North Carolina has something to offer, obviously. Um, but then you see it's always watch what they do, not what they say. Well, is Twitter what he's saying, and the visit is
yeah.
what he's doing? You see where I'm going with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and I think I don't know if this is matters, but I know when he was leaving Chapel Hill for his most recent visit, he texted me and said, "Hey, I just got in the car. Let me call you when I get to my grandmom's house." So for him when he's visiting, he spent that entire weekend at his grandmother's house. So I'm sure his
Yeah,
parents, hey, it's a trip. We get to do something fun and get to see family.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. Let me ask you this: you mentioned, I think it was Courtney.
Yeah,
That's not ranked.
Cameron Courtney. Yep.
How, Don? You've covered it a long time too, and obviously every staff is different. But how much do staffs in general, not this one specifically yet, we're not there yet. How much does that sort of build on itself? A guy's a 5-star, so we're going to offer him. Sight unseen, we're going to offer him. He's a 5-star, and then on down the line, how much does the star system actually influence coaches and recruiting staffs?
So I think it I don't know if we want to say influences, because I think they kind of feed off of each other. Because I really think that a lot of this stuff, because this is an art, not a science, a lot of this stuff I think is subconscious. If you go and watch a 5-star, you have already this built up perception of what he's going to look like, sort of thing, or a 4-star or whatever it may be. If you throw on a film and you're ranking guys and you're ranking one that's a 5-star, one's a 4-star, one's a 3-star, it affects you knowing that. So I think with all staffs do their own evaluation, and they're pretty detailed as far as the film and breaking down the film and giving grades. And with North Carolina in particular, because I know that system, I don't know it inside and out, but I know it way better than any other system. You have a bunch of different eyes that are involved. Mac Brown's talked about it a bunch. So obviously all those people are giving grades on the recruits. But I mean, we're humans. And if you're looking at film on a guy who's already ranked a 5-star, it's hard to kind of separate that. The other thing is that I feel like, and the people who do the rankings would never admit to this, obviously you try to ignore the offers, but it is difficult with a kid who has a load of offers, Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, so on and so forth, and to be like, he's garbage. He's a 3-star. Right. So I feel like these things kind of almost work together. And then what we end up having as the end result is, is kind of the rankings end up reflecting what the market for these kids are, just like any other market, a financial market or a betting market or any of those sort of things. That's what I feel like the rankings end up being for these guys. And we see it all the time. I can remember the best story I have, right? Do you remember Todd Gurley and Absolutely. Keith Marshall?
Yep.
And I remember forever. To this day, I still believe it. And I think I kind of, end up being, not to pat myself on the back, always felt Gurley was way better than Marshall. I took a friend actually to a Keith Marshall game, and Keith Marshall had like a 54-yard touchdown run that was like a bobble snap. He caught it, the defense caught off guard and just bolted down the field. Other than that, he didn't do anything, and they were getting blown down. He pulled himself out of the game. I just didn't think he had the mind for it. Whereas you had Todd Gurley, I can remember I think it was a state championship his junior season, playing defensive end with a sprained ankle and playing the entire game, playing defensive end and running back. But anyway, going back to my actual point, I was telling, I don't want to name names, but there was a this field who I kept on telling them Todd Gurley. And they were like, well, tell me what's going on with Keith Marshall. I'm like, no, I'm telling you, Todd Gurley, you need to give him a look. This is a kid that really he's a 4-star kid. I'm telling you, he's just as good. And I actually think he's better size. He's a track kid also, although he was in hurdles. Marshall was a pure speed guy. Then the next thing, so this is going on for about a year or so. Georgia offers. I get a phone call. What do you know about this same person? What do you know about this Todd Gurley guy? And I was like,
you remember the guy I've been telling you about for 2 years?
Guess what happened to Todd Gurley's ranking? He got a 4-star ranking. So now I don't think people are like, okay, this school offered, then we have to bump it up because it's this school. I think we subconsciously think, well, Georgia does really well. Alabama does really well. So if they offer a kid, they must be good. And really, if that's the way you're going about business, it's a pretty smart way to go about it, because if you just look at the track record of these guys, they're constantly recruiting better, developing better, finding these players and putting them in the NFL draft. They're getting higher. Just look at all the numbers. Everything backs that up. But yes, so all these things affect all these things kind of work together. And I know we kind of went off on a different tangent.
I think it goes back to the prestige thing we talked about in the first episode of us. Is that, hey, that school offered, he must be good.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, and this is not really answerable, but I'm interested in, if somebody has 40 offers from everybody, how many of those are legit offers?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like most of those kids' offers are not legit.
Yeah.
And then and you start to kind of realize where do they, and this is what I try to do, is where are they visiting? You talk to a kid and they have all these offers, claims all these offers. Who are you hearing from them? Who are you hearing from most frequently? And they only name like 3 or 4 schools. Well, those are clearly the ones that want you. Maybe some of those other schools, for whatever reason, would still take you. But for the most part, most kids have probably like a handful of schools that they could really are legit options for them. Now, you definitely have exceptions to the rule for sure. Noah Rogers could have went anywhere.
Yeah.
I want to answer Alan's question though. Was UNC ever in the running for Caleb Downs? I think there definitely was a point where UNC was in the running, but I think UNC fell off way before he admitted it, way before everybody accepted it. I think North Carolina fell off during that, I guess it was the 2021 season, which was another season that didn't go so well, particularly with the defense. It was the season that ended with that South Carolina bowl game where, I had multiple recruits mention that game to me about just how terrible North Carolina looked in that game. And that goes to the prestige thing. Everyone's talking about 9 wins and everything. There's certain games that matter more or impact someone's feelings about a school more than others. A bowl game where a lot of people are watching it because they're on ESPN and they're usually not competing against another game. Those games tend to be more impactful than, playing Wake Forest on ESPN Plus at noon.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so that kind of goes into the prestige thing. But I think going back to Caleb Downs, I think there was legit interest, but I think during that 2021 season, it started to shift into him focusing in on, the quote unquote, powerhouse schools, Alabama, Ohio State, and it sounds like he's killing it already.
Yeah, I think Alan Minton might be in the
MVP.
front seat for the MVP of today's podcast. He's been all over it. When
we do have to get into our top 5, but
yeah, we got 2 more minutes before we get into our top 5.
okay.
I think when we can talk about wins and losses. You talk about the game. That's surprising. A lot of people mention that game. How much do kids pay attention to results? Carolina goes 9-5. What 3 or 4 of those are close losses. Could have gone either way. Missed kick, dropped touchdown. Oregon game, get a stop there at the end, and that's probably a win for North Carolina. How much do recruits look at that team won 9, but they could have very easily? How much do kids think about what could have been versus what they see in the end?
They don't look at it like us at all. Now you have boys and they're big Carolina fans. When they're home, how, do they? This is I'm curious more than anything. Are they watching games with you?
One of them is all the time.
All right, but the other one not so much.
He's getting more into it since he'll be in Chapel Hill. I try to explain to him these guys are your classmates now. You need to support them. So he's done better. So I'll give him credit. But he's not as diehard as the other one.
Yeah. So now my son doesn't. I'm watching football. I'm watching sports nonstop, and my son's not sitting there unless he has his phone taken away and he's grounded. And even then. Even then, he will watch it a little bit and then just go to bed. That's what he does when he's grounded. So high school kids in general just don't watch this stuff. And you add in the fact, and you go look at some of these kids, they're going to games. So you might, when you're at North Carolina, you're watching that game, obviously. But the next week, when you're at NC State, you're going to hear about what North Carolina did. But it's more about what the perception of other people's what it was, but and then the next week you're somewhere else. You're Virginia Tech, and you know how it is. I love going to games, but then I also don't like going to games because for me, if I go to a game, that's my day. And I cannot. You can kind of follow games on your phone, and you go pull up games and watch it and everything. It's better nowadays than it was even like a few years ago, but it is hard to focus on a lot of games. I have 3 TVs in my man tower for a reason, because I'm
Yeah.
watching 3 TVs at least. I got a fourth I pull up here too. So I'm watching 4 games every moment of Saturday from noon until, if I can get the Hawaii game. Usually I'm asleep before the Hawaii game. But high school kids just don't, I mean, even if they're home, they're not sitting in front of their TVs like we are and watching games. They're out with their friends. They're not this they Gen Zs, they just don't watch it as much. So
I agree.
everything that their feelings about a program is all based off of kind of what the talk is. And so the talk about North Carolina, people don't like to hear this, was that they didn't have a great season. And this goes back to, I mentioned South Carolina is a hot team. I still couldn't tell you what their finish was. I know that they upset Tennessee and Clemson, but beyond that, I couldn't tell you. I feel like they had a crappy record, but
They were average, and they got those 2 wins. But it's the perception
it's a
wins, right?
perception. Yeah, because and here's why. That's what we talked about with those wins.
Yeah.
That's what was talked about for a few days.
Yeah.
And so people, the other stuff that they did, and then the other part of it is that it's a new coach, so you give them a little bit of the honeymoon phase that they're still in. I mean, if they have a crappy season this season, then people are going to start. It's going to that perception is going to start flipping on them, and it's going to hurt them. But that's just, and I'm just using South Carolina as an example. I know that's not the best team to bring up,
Well, I
but
mean, you can pick any team. It's the same thing with any. I mean, you can pick the other team down the road in West Raleigh. Same deal. I mean, perception of certain things far exceeds the reality. But like you say, and to your point, is that high school age players listen to the perception,
yes,
and they feed on the perception more than the reality. And it's also part of the reason why I asked the question last season, at the end, is, didn't you feel like you left a lot of meat on the bone?
yes, yeah.
And so anyway, it all goes back to it. What do you think? And this is a sidetrack, and we're going to drop our 5 here in a second. But what do you think about North Carolina High School Association, or whatever the governing body is called specifically, going to allow high school kids for name, image, and likeness? I mean,
I
you've
mean,
heard some of that stuff.
it's fine. I remember when Chaz Surratt was being recruited, and I went to Denver, North Carolina. I went there a bunch of times, and there was a billboard. I think it was for orthodontist there, with both Chaz and Sage Surratt on there. And I was thinking, legally they can't get any money, but hopefully they did, because obviously they're benefiting from that little town's, wide receiver QB duo at the time. So yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I'm all for people making money when they can. You know, I'm worried about it being used in a not so great way. So hopefully it's not, but I think it's at such a lower level that maybe it doesn't matter too much.
It's interesting. I think of it this way. Um, Joe Linebacker goes to school in Far Rockaway, and Far Rockaway just happens to be where Last Chance U's biggest alumni, most famous alumni lives, and he owns a business, and he wants to use Joe
Well,
Linebacker
that
as
sort
a.
of happens with some schools, like IMG. I mean, I don't think they pay people, but I mean, they give scholarships. And I mean, hell, if you're a football player, to live there on scholarship, that's, even if you're not getting money, it's pretty good setup.
Have you been to IMG before?
I have not. I've just seen pictures. I've heard stories. I've heard it's amazing.
We went down there.
Uh-huh. What'd you think?
And well, it's tough to get on campus, but if you have high school age kids that are quote unquote being recruited, they'll let you in the door.
Really?
And yeah, but it was like, yeah, yeah, they were being recruited. Anyway, we just drove around. It's
Mhm.
ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's nicer than plenty of college campuses I've been on,
Yeah.
and it is in the high society area of Florida down there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was crazy. It was pretty cool. And they were like, "This is a high school." I was like, "This is a high school." And there's a local kid that went down there to play basketball on like the B or C team, and I was like, "He goes to school here." It
Yeah.
was ridiculous. But anyway, top five.
Top
Top
five. All
five
right.
football
Do we
movies.
want to do we want to read everybody else's real quick?
I can pull some up before we get out of here because let's go with our guy Preston.
All right.
Necessary Roughness 1, Brian Song, oh, excuse me, Necessary Roughness 5, Brian Song 4, Waterboy 3. This is a very interesting mix. North Dallas 40, and then Ross Martin's Little League highlight film. I have not seen that film. If I would have noticed that name, I would have discounted this one. But what do you think about you've got the old movies or the older movies, and you've got the tearjerker movies,
Yeah.
and then you have a comedy, or a couple comedies if you include Ross Martin's.
Yeah, I mean that's what you're dealing with all these lists is that you have, the inspirations like Rudy and Remember the Titans, and then you have the comedies like Waterboy. I've not seen North Dallas 40, but I feel like that's a comedy, you know.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I
I mean that's
apologize for
that's
that.
that's what we're dealing with. Let me see. Am I able to? Oh, did I do that or did you?
I did it. Can you do it?
I don't know. Let's see. No, I cannot do it. All right. It literally just happened right when I moved my mouse. All right, so I'll read this one from Alan, who I think is in the front runner. We'll have to announce it next week who the MVP is, but I think he's in a good spot right now. Although, I mean, Preston's top 5 was pretty legit. Anyway, all right, so we have Longest Yard, Rudy, Facing the Giants. I'm not familiar with that. Friday Night Lights and Remember the Titans. Do you have anyone else? Any other top 5s in here?
I don't see, but I see a few. Like, look right here. This right here, this movie, and I have to admit, normally when I watch movies, I want to watch the unedited, not rated version. This is one of the movies where I won't comment why, but I want to see the
You,
rated version. I want to see the TV edit on this movie. But
I think I know
it is a
why.
classic. It is a classic movie. Uh, Shout out to Chris Fogel for that. Jeffrey Polly, Varsity Blues. I like that one. Isn't that a series? Is there a
No,
series
what
on?
I think they did make it into a series, but there's a movie. That was the
Yeah,
one when I was trying to explain that has the guy from Dawson's Creek on it.
yeah. Somebody called you out last. Somebody's got the program on here, and the program's the one where the dude's laid in the middle of the street,
Yeah, yeah.
and somebody ended up copycatting that and paying the ultimate price. So what would be your number one, Don, if you had to pick one?
So I struggled. Well, do we? So how are we going to do this? We're going to just say what number 1 is.
You tell me. How do you want to do it? Well, we can talk about. I'll give you mine, and then we can
All right, why
rank.
don't you give me yours and I'll give you mine, and then we'll go. Then we'll discuss.
Well, I'm gonna give you 2.5, and then you give me 2.5, and we figure
Okay.
out what
All right.
order, and folks can shout it out. I think my number one.
Well, you want you to go reverse?
Well, I can't go reverse. So okay, I'll go reverse. I'm gonna go the program 3. I'm gonna go Any Given Sunday 2. I'm going Remember the Titans 1 because you will be perfect in every way. What's your top 3?
My top 3, number 3. I went with one that I'm surprised people forgot about. I like The Express
I don't know if
about
I've seen that.
Ernie Davis with Syracuse. This is somewhat newer, but I really like that movie. It's inspirational, but it was during the time of this where the sport started to get segregated, and certain programs were not segregated. But anyway, in my number 2, Remember the Titans, and my number 1, Waterboy.
Oh lordy, you corny like that. So, folks, here's what we got. We got a top 3, and we want people to submit those. Send them to Don at Inside Carolina or Tommy at Inside Carolina, or hit us up on chat or whatever you want to do. We need an ultimate top 5 or top 3 list. My top 3 were Program, Any Given Sunday, and Remember the Titans. Don's were The Express. What was your second one? Remember the
Remember
Titans
Titans and
and
Waterboy.
Waterboy. So,
Do you have your rest of your top 5?
I do not. I think Varsity Blues was 4. I'm trying to find it. I told you I'm down at the beach. I'm not
So
around
I
my.
had my number five for me, Longest Yard, the original one, mostly because my dad's one of those people who loves really bad 70s movies. And so I have watched that so much. So that's more of like a paying homage to him. And then Friday Night Lights was my number 4, but I like the book a lot more. The other one, I hate to be that person. I like the book a lot more, but Blindside, I love the book.
Yeah.
I hated the movie.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because the book was actually made it seem like it was both the husband and wife that did a whole lot. Like the husband, I think, was the one who did a lot more for Michael Orr very early on, but in the movie they made it all about Sandra Bullock, and and that was, I don't know.
Yeah, and there's
Plus,
another one we haven't mentioned.
what's that?
That's We Are Marshall or Marshall, whatever the
Yeah,
Matthew McConaughey one is.
yeah,
I
what?
kinda,
Yeah, no, that's and then no one's mentioned Rudy, and if you look
yeah,
at any
well,
list
several people
online.
mentioned Rudy, yeah.
That's number one on like just about every list you find online.
I have
Which I
not
get
seen
it.
Draft Day. Draft Day is one that a
I
lot of people were talking about
I
during the draft.
I didn't like it.
I haven't seen it. I need to
Oh,
check
the
it
other
out.
one I thought about, not Jerry Maguire,
Yeah.
mostly because it's so quotable. There's so many quotes have come out of that movie. Even though I don't like what's his name?
You don't like Tom Cruise?
No.
Come on, man. How do you not like Tom Cruise?
Ugh,
Like, what's wrong with him? Are you
no.
jealous?
No.
No, we're not going down that road. That's too much old show. I'll tell you what, those 30 for 30s are
Uh-huh.
cool. And you
Yeah.
mentioned the Express, and that's what I thought about it. It was the SMU one. What was it, the Pony Express or
Yeah, Pony
whatever they call
Express,
that?
yeah.
Those type things are cool. But anyway, remember the Titans for me. I mean, it's relevant, and it was pretty
Yeah.
good. Junction Boys, those old school stuff like that. But anyway, sports movies are cool when they're done right, and a lot of times they just get. Alan Minton's challenging your Tom Cruise dislike.
I
Alan,
mean, what is
remember
there
Don
like
has
about
one
him?
vote.
Ugh.
Man, he's cool, dude. He like looks the same. He's looked the same for 50 years. That's why you don't like him. Anyway,
He's also like 4'1", you
uh,
know.
well, I mean, some of us aren't. All of us aren't blessed to be 6'5" and 235 and ripped like Don Callahan. Look, Don, this has been fun. It's after
220,
1:00.
225. Okay, lost 5 pounds.
So I cover Carolina baseball, and I know my height and weight. And then we interview somebody. I'm not gonna call the player out, but we interview somebody, and I go back and I look. I'm like, that's a big guy. I go back and look at the thing. He is at my exact height and weight, and I'm laughing because I'm like, how in the heck is that guy right there my exact height and weight? And he looks like he was built out of a rock, a piece of stone, and here I am the same height and weight. So 4'1", don't clown it. Your 4'1" might be somebody's 6'3". Let's get out of here.
All right.
Don Callahan. It's been the Scoop Live. It will be a new name. I'm thinking Noon Dish, Afternoon Dish, Afternoon Delight, High Noon Scoops. Bunch of different options. Don and I will narrow it down this time next week.
We're going to
And
be canceled before we can actually name this
we're not going to
podcast.
be canceled. We will not lie. We will not go away forever. We are here. Shout out to the folks that joined us. I think I saw it top 70 for
Good.
lunchtime with Don Callahan on Wednesdays. We'll be back next week for the same show. Look, just a heads up this week, got some baseball content coming out tomorrow. Got a next level show with Greg Barnes and I talked to Pat James of D1 Baseball. Somebody's asking about baseball stuff. Plenty of content in Inside Carolina, and check out Don's scoop about the defensive backfield on the message boards. Check out Sherelle and Joey and Sean and all that basketball talk and all the portal talk and maybe some reclass talk at some point. A lot of stuff going on. There is no off season. Johnny T-shirt sponsors it. I'm Tommy. That's Don. This has been the scoop. Everybody, please be safe.